Urgent warnings. Dr. James Hansen, head of the U.S. NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies, warns that even the toughest CO2 emission standard target currently in force needs to be lowered to assure planetary survival. He states, "What we have found is that the target we have all been aiming for is a disaster, a guaranteed disaster."
Australian scientist Dr. Professor Ross Garnaut warns we have limited time and options for climate change. His research calls upon Australia to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as much as 90% by the year 2050.
Over 600 scientists from across the United States addressed a letter to Congress urging immediate passage of a bill that would lower emissions by 65%. In their letter, the scientists stated, "Global warming represents by far the greatest threat ever posed to the planet's living resources."
Former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair states we need to act aggressively in the next 2 years, saying, "We have reached the critical moment for the decision on climate change. Even on the mildest application of precautionary principles, failure to act on climate change now would be deeply and unforgivably irresponsible." Dr. David Archer, professor of geophysical sciences at the University of Chicago in the U.S., stated, "I personally think that we've already passed a danger limit. The amount of sea ice in the Arctic Ocean has been decreasing over the years, but then, in 2007, it just crumbled. And the earthquake activity and the acceleration of flowing ice in Greenland, I think these are signs that we are already in dangerous territory." Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd and UN General Secretary Ban Ki-moon agree progress on climate change is too slow. Dr. Ted Scambos, lead glaciologist at the University of Colorado in the U.S., stated, "In the poles, anybody who works in polar science, nobody questions whether we are in a warming world. We're in trouble because we see it in our fields every year. And ice plates that have been there for 10,000 years, since the end of the last ice age, are gone."
Tipping points. The United Kingdom's National Academy of Sciences identifies the 9 regions of the planet most critically threatened by climate destabilization, all of which are experiencing severe stress. The main tipping points include
melting of the Arctic ice caps, melting of the Greenland ice sheet, collapse of West Antarctica's ice sheet, die-off of the Amazon rainforest due to desertification, collapse of the Indian summer monsoon, die-off of the northern boreal forest.
Tipping points 1 to 3. The Arctic Ocean, Greenland ice sheet, and Antarctic are disappearing at alarming rates, exceeding even worst-case scenarios.
From the data on the 2007 summer melt season in the Arctic Sea, a growing number of scientists have concluded that the sea ice could be gone sometime between fall 2008 and 2012, 30 years earlier than previous aggressive estimates.
In March, West Antarctica experienced the disintegration of the largest ice shelf 15 years ahead of predictions, alarming scientists at the speed at which it fell into the ocean. Tipping point 4. The Amazon rainforest is under siege.
Nearly 20% of global greenhouse gases originate from deforestation, with cleared lands being used primarily to graze livestock, raise food crops for animals, or raise biofuel. The Livestock Environment and Development Initiative within the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that 70% of the Amazon has been cut down for meat production.
Tipping point 5. The Indian monsoon season has grown increasingly erratic.
More unexpected patterns in the Indian monsoon have led to catastrophic events. Tipping point 6. Permafrost melting in boreal forests is releasing carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere, factors which are not currently accounted for in climate change forecasts.
The UN Environmental Program, or UNEP, called for urgent research into the danger of methane gas being released from thawing permafrost, which threatens to drive climate change faster than current expectations. Executive Director of UNEP, Achim Steiner, said, "The unknowns about the amount and rate of methane released from the thawing Arctic makes it a wild card when considering climate change risks."
Scientists are concerned that bacteria in the soil of formerly frozen regions, like the Arctic, will increase the carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere as they become more active in the warmer climates. Soil stores twice as much carbon as the atmosphere. Dr. Eric Davidson, senior scientist at Woods Hole Research Center in Massachusetts, USA, said, "There's a sort of a time bomb, in my view, waiting to go off. There's a huge stock of carbon stored in permafrost, and that is all subject to relatively rapid decomposition if that permafrost melts." Dr. Katie Walter, assistant professor of limnology at the University of Alaska, confirms that methane is being released from melting permafrost and bubbling up from frigid Arctic lakes. Dr. Walter says, "Permafrost is like a time bomb waiting to go off. As it continues to thaw, tens of thousands of teragrams of methane can be released into the atmosphere, enhancing climate warming. She also states that 950 gigatons of carbon gas is trapped beneath the permafrost layer of Siberian lakes, more CO2 than is in the atmosphere today.
Climate change-induced drought, biofuels, and demand for meat are creating food insecurity, unrest, and hunger. Reasons:
UK newspaper, The Guardian, states eating meat is a main cause of world famine and malnourishment. In an article, Why Vegans Were Right All Along, non-vegetarian investigative journalist George Monbiot explains how demand for meat by the world's wealthy pushes the price of grain too high for the less fortunate. Because it takes over 5 pounds of grain to create 1 pound of meat, every meal, including meat, directly takes food out of the mouths of the poor.
the rice-producing nations of India, China, Iraq, or Vietnam, and Egypt are placing export limits on rice, pushing prices up even farther.
Food riots have erupted across the world, from Mexico to Egypt, from Mauritania to Haiti, with several people dying in bread lines in Egypt. In India, many millions have reduced their meals from 2 to 1 per day. And in El Salvador, the meals are less than half now.
For more urgent details, please see www.suprememastertv.com.